So it turns out that black voter turnout wasn't that great in the 2022 midterm. What does that mean for the Democrats? Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So Democrats pretty much across the board were pretty satisfied with the results of the 2022 election. I mean, going into Election Day, there weren't many people who were predicting that we'd actually be increasing our margin in the Senate and among the governor's offices, and actually pick up legislatures and keep the House very close, despite the gerrymandering that went on there. One assumption that you frequently hear is that the reason that Democrats did well is because the black community turned out to vote. Well, as it turns out, the data really doesn't support that position. Let's check it out here. Here's a graph that's put together by the New York Times that shows that in 2022, black turnout was actually 26% lower than for white voters in the states of Georgia, Louisiana, and North Carolina. Now, the reason, of course, those states are particularly notable is, number one, Georgia and North Carolina were the site of some pretty intensely hard-fought Senate seats. And although it's going to a runoff election, it appears like the Democrats are well-positioned in Georgia, and we lost really a closer-than-expected race in North Carolina. As it turns out, had black turnout been higher in those two states, at least more consistent with what it has been in the past, Raphael Warnock probably would have won the election outright, doing away with the need for a runoff election, and Democrat Sherry Beasley might have defeated Ted Budd in North Carolina. The reason, though, that we have this graph here is because those three states are states that actually record race on the voter file. As a result, we're able to compare who turned out based upon their racial makeup. Most states do not include race on the voter file, so we don't have this kind of data there. But there is other data that supports this narrative. For example, in my home state of Michigan, where of course we had a couple of pretty hard-fought races with the Democrats doing very well here, turnout in Detroit was lower than you would have expected. And in Pennsylvania, where the Democrats also had a good year, although those races were also hard-fought, turnout in Philadelphia, for example, was relatively low. Now, of course, we know that Philadelphia and Detroit tend to have higher percentages of black voters than in other parts of the state. Fortunately, that didn't make a huge difference in either Michigan or Pennsylvania, but where it might have made a difference is in Wisconsin, where Mandela Barnes came within an eyelash of defeating Ron Johnson, the U.S. Senator from Moscow. Their turnout in Milwaukee was low enough that had it hit the level we've seen in prior elections, Mandela Barnes might have won that election. So it's certainly worth asking what's going on here. As we know, in both Wisconsin and in Georgia, you had black candidates for U.S. Senate, and in Georgia, you had a black candidate for governor. And yet, the black vote didn't turn out in those states as you might have expected. I have to say this surprised me because if you look at this graph here from the Pew Research Center, you can see that in 2008, the black turnout was almost as high as the white turnout. And in 2012, it's actually the one presidential year where the black turnout actually exceeded white turnout. And of course, we know what was significant about those 2 years. That's when President Obama was on the ballot. The significant drop in black turnout in 2016 would have been one of the things that probably led to Hillary Clinton losing the election, among other things, of course. So it's worth asking what's going on. Is there something Democrats need to be doing more to excite turnout? Perhaps. Perhaps part of the story, though, is also the Shelby County v. Holder decision. This is the decision that the Supreme Court handed down in 2013 that basically eviscerated the Voting Rights Act and allowed states that have a history of racial discrimination in the South to go back to their voter oppression practices of the past. Well, according to this graph by the Brennan Center, you can see that in the states that used to be covered by the Voting Rights Act, pre-Shelby County v. Holder, gap between black and white turnout has changed dramatically. So while it might be true that the Democrats need to do more to encourage turnout by black voters, it's also pretty clear that some institutional barriers have been reenacted that have made it harder for black voters to come out and vote. There's one more thing, though, that strikes me about this data, and it's that there's this perception that Democrats pretty much have lost the white vote at this point. And that really doesn't stand up to the results of the 2022 election, does it? What this shows is that the Democrats actually did surprisingly well among white voters, including in places where you had candidates who were able to appeal to either suburban voters, like Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, or working class voters, like John Fetterman in Pennsylvania. These two candidates were able to achieve impressive victories in swing states, despite the fact that the black vote really didn't come out the way I'm sure they hoped it would. And it shows that while Democrats need to do everything we can to encourage black people to come out and vote, we cannot entirely write off the white vote yet, especially in cases where you're dealing with extreme MAGA candidates, like you were in both Michigan and Pennsylvania. The white voters are open to the appeals of the Democrats, even in tough years for the Democrats like this one. Well, if you want to see another video that I actually uploaded on Election Day this year, where I pointed out that I thought the Democrats actually might do better than people were predicting, check out this video over here. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.